All right. Well, as I said at the outset, we're back for a great chance to talk with our 2023 awardees and celebrate them in this discussion, but also some conversation at lunch and then the formal events this evening at the gala. So this is a chance for us to have a conversation with the Vannevar Bush, the NSB Science and Society, and the Alan Waterman Award winners. And our colleague Dorota Grejner-Brzezinska is going to moderate the discussion. And so, first of all, to all awardees, a hearty congratulations. So I'll hand the floor over to Panch if he wants to say a few words, and then we'll jump in.
We will keep it very few so we can hear from our amazing awardees. First of all, I want to say congratulations and welcome to NSF. We are thrilled to have you. You're the best of the best of the best. And for the folks that have won the Waterman Award, I'm just going to give you one small point to remember. Typically, a person who wins a career award and the Waterman Award, apparently, are also likely to win the Nobel Prize. Okay, Jennifer Doudna, go and check Jennifer Doudna.
So,
and you will find
no pressure.
That's what I'm saying. So I said, no pressure. Having said that, delighted to have you here. Look forward to celebrating with all of you this evening. Thank you so much for everything that you do. We are very grateful at NSF for all that you do. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. And it's wonderful to meet you all. And once again, please accept my most hearty congratulations. And we all look forward to learning from you about your work, about you, and about all your exceptional achievements. I begin with very brief introductions, and then we invite all of you to say a few words about your work, about your accomplishments, and I think you want to share with the board and the audience. So let me start with first with the Vannevar Bush Awardee, who is joining us remotely. He's his home in New York. Can we see Dr. Richard Garwin?
You can't see me. You can't see me because the host has disabled the vision and also has muted me at times.
All right, fantastic to know that you are now unmuted. Let me briefly introduce you, Richard. Okay. There you go. Dr. Richard Garwin is a world-renowned physicist who led pioneering work in the U.S. defense and intelligence technologies. He has been a highly influential advisor to presidential administrations in the past 70 years. So, Richard, it's an honor to meet you. Next, I'd like to introduce our three Waterman Award winners. I'll start with Natalie. Dr. Natalie King is a science educator at Georgia State University. Her research focuses on advancing Black girls' achievements in STEM education, community-based STEM education programs, and the role of curriculum in fostering equity and science in technology and learning. Next to Natalie is Dr. Asegun Henry, who is a mechanical engineer at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where he studies new energy technologies at heat transfer. And his work addresses a very broad range of problems from the atomic to gigawatt scale. Phenomenal. Next is Bill Anderegg, who is the biologist at the University of Utah. His research focuses on the intersection of ecosystems and climate change. And Bill is currently studying forest ecosystem and their sensitivity to drought and resiliency to climate stress. So finally, we have two of our Science and Society Award winners. Representing EngineerGirl, we have Dr. Simil Raghavan, a senior program officer at the National Academies of Engineering, who oversees the EngineerGirl website. The board chose EngineerGirl for its engaging initiative to create a more inclusive and nurturing community for budding young female engineers. And last but not least, representing the New York Hall of Science, or NYSCI, right? We have Dr. Margaret, the CEO of NYSCI, and the board recognized NYSCI for its innovative approach to promoting informal and equitable science and technology learning. So now I would like to proceed with giving each of you a few minutes to talk about yourself, your work, your accomplishments, how to get to where you are. or what's next. And I'd like to maybe ask each one of you to speak for 3 to 5 minutes, because we would like to use quite a bit of time to let the board let to know you through Q&A that we plan for the second part of this. So Richard, let's start with you. Would you please share a bit about yourself and your work? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, my work is mostly from long ago, and how long ago is really quite impressive. It first started in 1950 when I went to Los Alamos for the first time and learned about nuclear weapons in the report library. So I learned all about nuclear weapons the first week by reading all of the progress reports from the various groups during the Second World War for every week. And so I knew everything everybody knew, but didn't have all the ideas. And it took me until a year at the University of Chicago on the faculty. I had gotten my PhD in December 1949 with Enrico Fermi as my mentor. And he suggested I come to Los Alamos with him. So it was a good experience and a good introduction. It was amazing how much freedom people had at that place at that time. And in the second year, having known Edward Teller for a long time at the university, I asked him what had happened in the meantime, because we couldn't talk about classified material at the University of Chicago. And he mentioned the Teller-Ulam paper of March 9, 1951, that had just happened. And I had been to Korea and to see how the war was going there. And I heard from Teller the idea of using an auxiliary bomb, what's called a primary now, in preparing the thermonuclear charge to be burned. This was contrary to a theorem that Teller had persuaded himself was valid, but was not. And for the whole time, ever since the beginning of World War II, he had been under the misimpression that if you couldn't burn liquid deuterium at normal density, you couldn't burn it at 100-fold or 1,000-fold compression. So I took until July 25th to write my own classified paper of 4 pages with a big fold-out sketch, which was the Mike test, IB Mike, of November 1, 1952. So just 16 months after the paper. And it was fired essentially as I had designed it, and had 11 megatons of yield. But the main thing it did was to enable the building of any kind of nuclear weapon, really by anyone, with the investment of only 4 kilograms of plutonium, instead of the investment of as much plutonium as was required to give the fission yield. So that was the beginning of my influence. And the end was pretty much in 1963, although it lasted until 1973 in intelligence, for instance, intelligence satellites. But in 1963, I sat next to John Tukey at the President's Science Advisory Committee, and he was writing Fourier sums on a scratch pad. So I asked him whether he knew something I didn't know, which of course he did. He knew lots of things I didn't know. And he mentioned that one of his colleagues at GCHQ had an idea that would let you double the number of points in a Fourier series, but not multiply the amount of work by a factor of 4. And this would ultimately possibly lead to n log n operations of addition and multiplication rather than n squared. which doesn't seem to make much difference if n is 100, but if n is 10,000, or if n is 10 to the 8th as the number of pixels in a picture, then the number between 10 to the 16 and 10 to the 8th times the logarithm of 10 to the 8th, which is only 8 times 2.3. Anyhow, that's what I regard as my main contribution, is the Cooley-Tukey algorithm, although I played the role only of midwife in creating it and in bringing Cooley and Tukey together, and in having a wonderful algorithm, sometimes called the most important algorithm ever invented. And I've called it the most important algorithm since the invention of arithmetic, because it does exactly the same thing. So that's my story, longer than it should have been. Thank you.
And what a story it is, Richard. Thank you so much. And next, Natalie, may I invite you to say a few words?
Absolutely. Good morning. My name is Natalie King. I am the daughter of Daniel and Eulette Williams, who hailed from the beautiful island of Jamaica. I was born in New York. Was raised in Florida, one of 5 children. So how did I get here? I've always loved science. I've always loved children. And growing up, that equated to me becoming a pediatrician. And so all the way through college, I set my eyes on going to medical school to become a pediatrician. In fact, my older sister, Nicole, we had a little bit of our own pact that she would be a family physician and I would be a pediatrician. And together we would take care of the whole family. Well, she did pursue medicine. She's an OBGYN. And my trajectory looked a little bit different. I can recall when I was in undergraduate, doing my undergraduate degree at the University of Florida, a professor, Dr. Harrison, he was my Chem 1 professor. I went to him on a Friday night because I was having a little bit of issue understanding coffee cup calorimetry. And he said to me, he said, you're going to go far because while everyone else is thinking about the party that they're going to go to tonight, you are in my office learning about coffee cup calorimetry. After my undergraduate degree, I decided that I was going to take a little bit of a break, but I wanted to teach in the local community that gave so much to me. So I taught high school biology and chemistry. I had the science background because, I was pre-med. I took chemistry and biology and physics and biochem, you name it. But when I got there, I understood that there was IEPs and there were 504 plans, another language that I never heard of. And so I decided to do my MED in special education. While doing that, I was preparing for my last semester, and Dr. Adams, who attended my church, I said, I need one more course to take before I graduate. She's like, well, I'm a math educator, but I'm going to introduce you to my colleague, Dr. Rose Pringle. And she did. I took her inquiry-based science course. And at the end, I had to turn in my portfolio. And she said, well, what's next? I said, well, I'm applying to medical school. And she said, well, you need to consider a degree in science education. And I looked at her and I said, a what? What is that? And so she decided to, share with me the pathway. And it's just been a beautiful world since. And that has been my transition into education and into science education. It was Dr. Rose Pringle who believed in me that I could become a science educator, Dr. Harrison who believed in me that I could become a scientist, and together I'm able to really move and change things within our STEM education and our field. So a lot of people know me about the work that I do with Black girls, but I'm married and I have 3 sons. I have 3 boys at home. I have one who's almost 15. I have a 9-year-old and I have an 18-month-old. And so it is busy at home, but I love our boys. The research still does focus on the girls and how can we really advance them within STEM education? What do we need to do within our classroom settings, within our career settings, in the places of work to make sure that is a space that is inviting, that is welcoming. And we're not preparing children in order to navigate toxic cultures, but we're changing the culture within our institutions and within industry and within organizations. I'm also do a lot of community-based work. Started off with within our church, local church, is offering science programs. And now figuring out how can we partner with youth-based organizations in order to build their capacity to offer high-quality programs where the onus is not just left on schools. And then the last part of my research is really increasing teacher diversity. I serve as a PI now in a Noise Track 2 grant. And with that, we have worked to increase those who have STEM degrees and to bring them into middle and high school classrooms within the Metro Atlanta area, but they're now going into leadership and beyond. And so how can we really build capacity within our schools and within our communities? And so this award, Dr. Alan T. Waterman, he was scientifically talented, but also a world-renowned scientist. And so what I learned is that he was also a public servant. And so what I hope to do is to continue that within my research around Black girls in STEM education, within community-based organizations, as well as building the teacher capacity, but also increasing teacher diversity. And thank you so much for this opportunity and for the award.
Thank you very much, Natalie. I'm sure you would have been an extremely great pediatrician, but I'm so glad that you actually took a turn in your career and you are here now with us and recognized for your fantastic work. Asegun, may I invite you to go next?
Sure. Thank you. Excited to be here. Very, very grateful for this award. I guess a bit of background about me. Both of my parents were professors as well, so it's somewhat of the family trade. I grew up largely in Tallahassee, Florida. Went to Florida A&M University as my undergraduate and eventually went to grad school at MIT. I guess going back a little bit in terms of how I got interested in science and engineering, for me, I would say I was extremely lucky to be a product of, I guess, similar kind of programming and things that Natalie does. I was actually in a rites of passage program for young boys when I was young, and that had a absolutely transformative impact on me, helped anchor my interest in science and engineering. In particular, I was a young 10, 12-year-old Black boy that was now exposed to a entire league of grown men that were teaching me how to be a man. One of the things that was emphasized in the sessions that we would have is that one of the key pieces of being an adult is being able to tell the difference between the real and the unreal. And and for me, when I would then go to school, my interest actually was not so much rooted in science specifically as much as the scientific method itself. I became particularly intrigued by the idea that there was a process, that there were things you could do to determine the difference between something that's right or wrong. And I became very much drawn to absolute truths, things that are actually true that you can prove, things that we know are true, and the process for how you actually go about doing it. That got me interested in math. I was pretty decent at math. And in particular, there was a course I took in high school, calculus, that I wouldn't say I was actually interested in becoming an engineer until I took calculus. And when I took calculus, I had a very special teacher. His name was Coach Mead. And he did a phenomenal job. One of the things he would do is he would take a very extensive amount of time explaining why a concept that he was going to teach us was important and useful before he would teach it to us. And so when he would teach that way, we would be on the edge of our seats by the time he was about to introduce it. Like, what is this thing? He was like, next week, I'm going to teach you about this thing called the derivative. And when I show it to you, you will be within the less than 1% of the world that knows what it is. And once you know what this is what you need to know to be able to put a man on the moon. And he would hype it up so much that we were so excited to finally learn what it was. And he was a phenomenal teacher. I adopted that same approach in my own teaching style going forward when I later became a professor to really provide a lot of context for students so they can really understand and appreciate why a particular topic, a particular issue is important before we actually introduce it. But ultimately, these things kind of came together and created a perfect storm where I ended up going on to college, Florida A&M, pursuing a degree in mechanical engineering. I actually also grew up as a musician. I was a drummer playing African percussion growing up, and I was particularly fascinated with vibration. That ultimately is what led me to mechanical engineering specifically. And later, taking thermal fluids, learning that at the very core of it, heat itself is vibration at the atomic level. And so I became intrigued by that. That ultimately kind of segued into my graduate studies at MIT. My PhD advisor, Gong Chen, I'll never forget, there was kind of a fateful moment. I walked into his office when I first arrived. He said, "Oh, it's great you're here now. What do you want to study?" And in that moment, it came to my mind. I said, I've been always curious how atoms move. I was always curious what vibrations they have, what are the frequencies. I never got straight answers to these things before. I was really curious if you could turn the sound of an atom, like the vibrations, into an actual sound that we could hear, what would it sound like? And so that curiosity is what ultimately led me to study heat transfer at the atomic level. And if you scroll back even further, back when I was maybe about 15 or so, back then we used to call it global warming. I felt a really strong calling to want to do something about global warming. It became, as I mentioned, this idea of really linking absolute truths together became kind of a framework for how my brain started to interpret the entire world, built a whole network of absolute truths in my mind and very quickly can extrapolate. And so at age 15, it became very obvious to me that if we didn't make absolutely gigantic changes in our entire infrastructure, human beings would not continue to exist on this planet due to global warming. And so I kind of dedicated my life to it at that age. I didn't know what form it would take, but I knew that was the area that I wanted to be involved in. And as I later got involved in heat transfer and things progressed, ultimately ended up having an opportunity to work at the Department of Energy post-graduation with my PhD to get back into really large-scale energy-related research. That ultimately led to a number of things, but at the end of the day, ended up making some significant contributions and trying to outline new areas of research for doing things with heat at extremely high temperatures, new regimes of performance, and able to make devices that utilize liquid metal, and ceramics, and graphite in ways that had not been done before. And so ultimately these things and this kind of culture that I was infused with of challenging conventions, doing things differently, always asking, well, why can we not? And looking for the spaces where we haven't done things and there isn't any physical law that says we can't, so let's try it. And that has kind of led to a lot of different things that we've explored over the course of my career this far. And so I'm here today getting this award. I'm extremely appreciative. It's a huge validation of everything that we've been doing. I've been blessed with amazing students, postdocs, research scientists in my group over the years. And this is ultimately a product of all their effort.
Thank you very much. Fantastic story. Bill, over to you.
Great. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. My path into science really started down a dusty mountain road. So I grew up in southwestern Colorado and spent a lot of my time with my family hiking, camping, and fishing across the southern Rockies, often in the shade of very lush aspen forests, this iconic tree species in the West that forms these amazing groves. When I came back to those same mountains in the summer before starting a PhD program, I remember very clearly standing on a parched dirt road on a hot, sunny summer day and being simply stunned that the once green and verdant landscapes that I remembered as a kid and had spent so much time in now looked much more like moonscapes. Thousands upon thousands of skeletal trees reaching up into the hot summer sky. And this prompted a huge number of questions. What is going on here? Could this be related to climate change? And most crucially, is this a sign of things to come? These questions really hooked my curiosity and set a lot of the research that I went on to tackle in my PhD, and a lot of the research that my group has dug into since. And it's because the future of Earth's forests in the 21st century in a rapidly changing climate is both fundamental to all of us, to humanity, and highly uncertain. So Earth's forests currently take up about a quarter of the CO2 that humans put up into the air every single year and form this immense brake, slowing down the speed of climate change. And one of the defining questions in the field is, will they continue to do so this century? We simply don't know right now. And this is because Earth's forests are balanced upon a knife edge between two opposing sets of forces. On one hand, rising carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere can benefit plants and let them do more photosynthesis and grow more. And that may let Earth's forests continue to grow and expand or maintain or expand this critical carbon sink. But on the other hand, the stresses of climate change, temperature, drought, wildfires, pests and pathogens can overwhelm the benefits of CO2 and drive these regional scale forest die-off events like the one and many others we've seen in the West in the past 20 years. So the balance of these two forces is crucial to the future of forests in the US and around the globe. Our research is really focused on trying to unravel the future of Earth's forests and use tools from plant physiology, forest ecology, and carbon cycle science to build more mechanistic projections of Earth's forests. We're excited to really, with the Waterman Award, increase our ambition and do more experiments that fuse directly into cutting-edge computer models to make more mechanistic and more probabilistic projections of Earth's forests, because what hangs in the balance is immense. It's a huge swath of Earth's biodiversity. It's ecosystem goods and services provided to communities and countries around the world. And it's a potentially large feedback to climate change and the speed of climate change this century. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Bill, for sharing your story. Fascinating, and keep going. We need to save the planet. Simil, over to you. Could you please tell us a bit about your role and about the EngineerGirl's mission?
Absolutely. Thank you. I just want to start by saying thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here. And as we're talking about my role, obviously it's changed a lot over the years at the National Academy of Engineering. But when I started, I was a fellow, and I was shown this amazing website, and I was told that it had been there for about 6 years, and most of the people that worked on it were interns and fellows. And I was told, see what you can do with it. Well, that was an amazing assignment for someone like me, because I was an engineer, and I took that to mean figure out how to use the resources that are available to the National Academy of Engineering to make sure that as many girls as possible can see themselves as future engineers. And there were a lot of amazing resources available at the National Academy of Engineering, many of which are some of them here in this room. We had some really amazing minds that were part of the EngineerGirl committee to advise us on what needed to come next. And from my mind, having been one of those girls for whom engineering was not really introduced early, I knew how important it was. And I also knew that just one person telling a girl once in her life that you should consider engineering is not going to be enough. You need to have an ability for the girl to see all of the possibilities and to envision herself in that position. And there need to be people who've been there, who can give advice and explain what it's like and explain what that career can offer and why it can help somebody reach their goals. And one of the amazing resources available to the National Academy of Engineering are engineers like that. And I knew from my own experiences in engineering that there are thousands of people who would like to be that role model and support the next generation, and EngineerGirl really represented an opportunity for them to do that. So really, it has been about building that community, providing a voice for the engineers as well as for the next generation so that they can communicate with each other and learn from each other and create a community in a field that has not always been welcoming.
Thank you, Simil. So, Margaret, if I'm not mistaken, you've been with NISI for about 10-ish years now?
15.
Could you please tell us how it evolved under your leadership?
Absolutely. So I also want to thank you all for this incredible award and for the opportunity to speak to you today. So the New York Hall of Science, just to paint a bit of a picture, is New York City's interactive science and technology center. We serve about 400,000 visitors every year, and we also run a number of different programs in education, in youth development, and do a lot of close work with our local community of Corona, Queens. We are located in the borough of Queens, so if you've flown into LaGuardia or JFK, you may have seen us from the air. We have beautiful rockets that are artifacts from the early days of the space program, which you can actually see when you fly over the building. But I mention that because I often say there's no kind of sweeter spot for a science center to be than in a place like Queens, New York. And for those of you who don't know Queens, it's made up of a number of different communities. Over half of the residents have moved to their neighborhoods from elsewhere. There are, by some estimates, 153 languages spoken in the borough. So an incredibly, incredibly diverse collection of communities where people want nothing more than the opportunity for themselves and their children to succeed. And that it is really a kind of privileged place to be engaged in STEM learning activities. So a little bit about how I came to be at the New York Hall of Science and really what I saw as the opportunity when I got there. So I, a long time ago, was working on my doctorate in developmental psychology at Columbia. And like lots of young people, I needed to find a way to support myself and work. And I got lucky. I landed a job at what was then called Children's Television Workshop, now Sesame Workshop. And this was the early 80s, and we were early in the business of beginning to experiment and create interactive media projects for children that were really sort of sitting at the intersection of education and engagement. And I spent about 5 years at the workshop. I always said they kept me around because I was cheap, versatile graduate student labor, the kind of kid that would do absolutely anything. But it was an incredible, incredible learning experience. And then I went from the workshop to Bank Street College of Education. And for those of you who don't know Bank Street, it's a school of education. So in the business of training teachers and other kinds of educational professionals. When I was there, there was a vibrant research group. And also a burgeoning field of work, again, in children's interactive media. And I got lucky because Bank Street was an incredibly sort of child-centered, child-steeped place that also taught me a huge amount about what was possible in the field of education and in the field of learning more broadly. And really, I think in many ways had an outsized influence on the person I've become and what I've done. And very briefly, one of the first experiences I got to work on at Bank Street was a children's television series that aired on PBS. It was called The Voyage of the Mimi. Some of you maybe saw it. Deborah Ball, you worked with Maggie Lampert. Maggie was an advisor on that project. And the executive producer of the series, a man named Sam Gibbon, was an amazing children's television producer, and he was an amazing and deeply caring educator. And I learned so much about the things that you could do with high quality, well-designed learning experiences, whether they were interactive media or other kinds of interactive learning environments. And so those were the ideas that I brought with me as I joined the Hall of Science about 15 years ago, hard to believe. And a lot of what we've done there is to really try to leverage the degrees of freedom you get in a place like ours. We're not constrained by testing or accountability or a set curriculum. We have tremendous opportunities, a real gift to be able to create what inspired, deeply engaging learning can look like. And that's what we've done. I'm here today with our chief learning officer, who has done an amazing job of creating, a small but kind of mighty R&D division within our institution, which in so many ways is the driver of, I think, some of our most innovative work, a lot of which has been supported by the National Science Foundation. And I think the other thing I want to mention is that being in a community like Queens, where we have so many different people coming into our environment, so many different young people from so many different backgrounds engaging in our programs and experiences, we have an opportunity to think well and deeply about how you create pathways of engagement into STEM learning that, we like to say, really lower the barrier to entry. We like to talk about giving every learner a foothold of success from the moment they enter until the moment they leave. And that means either a visit to the museum or a workshop or a program of work. It can mean any of those kinds of experiences. But we take very, very seriously that challenge of how you design so that nobody bumps up against the wall of failure. And I think, our aspiration for, Katie likes to say we're a relatively modest-sized place tucked away in a corner of Flushing Meadow Corona Park in Queens that likes to always punch above its weight. But we really aspire to be a model for the kind of STEM learning that every young person in this country, in the world more broadly, should be able to encounter and experience. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your fantastic stories. I'm sure my colleagues are really eager to learn even more about you. So without further ado, I would like to open the floor for questions. But because I have a mic, I will ask the first question. Simil, it's for you. How do you think your own career could have been different if you had the resource like EngineerGirl?
That's a great question. I think I might not be leading EngineerGirl. Had EngineerGirl been there, I probably would have been able to find my way within engineering, and I likely would have been an engineer. My own story involves not discovering engineering until I was a junior in college. I wanted to change the world, and I wanted to do something that would make a difference in people's lives. And for me, I thought that meant I needed to go into something like maybe medicine, but I wasn't certain I wanted to be a doctor. I had worked in an elementary school, and so I wanted to help kids, but I didn't think that I'd have a lot of power as a teacher. And so I decided to study social work. And I was a social work major up until my junior year, but I always had these niggling feelings that I might not have a lot of power to make change as a social worker either. And so when I was in one of my classes, I believe she was an adjunct professor, and she was frustrated with me because I always had a ton of questions. And she was trying to explain some element of policy, and my question was why? I kept saying, I understand what the policy is, but why can't we do something to make a difference in that? Why can't we change it? And she looked at me and she, just out of frustration, said, Simil, you ask too many questions. If you're going to be a good social worker, you need to learn to do what you're told. And I immediately said, okay, this is it. I've been thinking all this time that I shouldn't study this, and I think that means I can't be a social worker. And so I went out to try to discover what I should study. I was trying to figure out how to make a difference in the world. And I luckily had a friend who said, you know, maybe you should come and talk to my engineering advisor and just find out if that's a possibility. And thank goodness I did that. But I think then it took me another 3 years to finish undergrad, and then several more years to finish my PhD. And I think all of those experiences led to what I ultimately did. But I think had I had that resource at an early time, I would have made that decision earlier to study engineering. I probably would have chosen a different school, and I probably would have gone straight into engineering as soon as I could.
Well, thank you so much. I hope you have no regrets. Anyway, I would like to open the floor for questions. Vic, you first.
Sure, thank you. And thank you all for coming here today. Congratulations. My question is to Dr. Henry and Dr. Anderegg. And by the way, go Radlers. So, all right, I'd like to see that here. There was a recent article just about 2 weeks ago in a very published journal, New York Times, but it talked about the decline in the numbers of men, particularly Black men, going into STEM. And then also when we look at our 2022 indicators report, and also in terms of white men. So in those two demographics, the male population is not going into both science and engineering at the numbers that are needed for the workforce that we have to fill. I'd like to hear from both of you. What do we do? Because obviously we've got some people here that are making sure that we get a lot more women in STEM. But what can we do about getting more men? And obviously we also see this in the Latino population, back into STEM, back into math, back into the science. And let me just preface, because each of you had a short story. I'm a product of the first space race. So the government put tons and tons of money into schools, built a radio set at 6 years old, didn't know anything about dipole oscillations, but that kind of thing that got the curiosity. But that seemed to kind of have wavered after the space race was over. From your point of view, what do you see as how do we get more males back into the STEM disciplines?
Well, that's a fascinating question. I guess something that really resonated from Dr. Henry's talk is really not only the curiosity, but explaining why this matters and connecting this to, and it's been a theme, I think, in many of our presentations, that this is, everyone has to see why what they do matters. And when you're learning something, whether it's fundamentals of plant biology or calculus, really understanding that this affects the real world. There are careers that you can take that use this knowledge. And we've been working to design a new earth and environmental science major at the University of Utah. And first and foremost in our mind is, why do students take this? What are they going to do with this major? And how can we inspire them? How can they see themselves actually going out into the world, using this knowledge and these skills and making a difference? And so it's really trying to look outward from our university to see, how can this actually benefit society and make an impact? That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, this is a hard question. I don't think that, similar to climate change, I don't think there's a silver bullet. I don't think there's one thing that you can do, or even a couple of things that you can do that really move the needle on this issue. Your question is interesting in posing it in the sense of both white men and black men. I think of those problems as somewhat interconnected, but also rather different. I would hypothesize that the connection for white men may actually be related to the dumbing down of America as a whole. There's a rather general disinterest in science and engineering, and maybe you'll go so far as even the truth in America, period. And that's a trending thing that I think drags along with it a disinterest in science and engineering across the board. I think specifically for black men, there is another layer which has to do with identity and seeing people and it not being cool and it not being something to aspire to. I think there's an aspect of it, for me at least, that I know was particularly impactful, which I think is a layer that we have to, that some programming can help undo, is there's a layer of mystique. There's a layer of opacity that makes it difficult for kids to actually understand what does it actually take to become a scientist or an engineer, and what is it like once you become a scientist and engineer. You know, most kids go through high school and actually have no idea what the salaries are that you make. Like, we don't usually, like, there's almost a culture in America, like, particularly for people who make a lot of money, right? You don't talk about your salary. And I had a great mentor who kind of set a bit of a step apart for me, and I kind of took on the tradition. Like, he made it a point, let's talk about salary. Let's talk about how much I make, you know, and let's talk about like my sister's a doctor, and we just grow up always saying doctors make a lot of money, but how much money do they really make? You know, and when you start to make it quantitative, people can start to assess, well, all right, I got a whole media campaign that shows me that going to the street and being a drug dealer is a way to quick money. But how much money are we even talking about? How much money does the average drug dealer really make? Maybe a doctor actually makes much more than that. And until that's demystified, it ceases to be attractive to go a different path. And so I think what I find when I talk to kids, you know, I peel that onion back. It's like, let's talk about it. How much do lawyers make? How much do doctors make? What are the different things you can do? What is your daily life like? You know, I can't tell you how many kids I talk to, or actually parents who come and say, my kid's interested in engineering. I say, oh, how do you know? Oh, they like video games, right? They want to be an electrical engineer because they like video games, right? And it's like there's a layer of opacity. Like, we have not done a good job of demystifying and clarifying, like, what does the job even look like? What does that even, as people say mechanical engineering, they're like, oh, you build robots? Well, we do a lot of different things, right? So I think there's a huge gap in education about what do we even do in these fields? What does our daily life even look like? What is our impact? I think that's one thing that maybe NSF is well poised to help address. But I think systemically throughout the entire United States and even more broadly in the world, there's a whole bunch of other problems that NSF may not be well poised to really address.
All right. Suresh.
Yeah, just a wonderful spectrum of awardees, right? All the way from Dr. Garwin to the next generation. So congratulations to all of you. And one of you being a heat transfer person is rather gratifying to me. The question is for you, Dr. Garwin. You've seen the arc of science for a while now in the country. What do you think we're doing right, and what do we think we're doing wrong, and what could we be doing better in terms of enabling the kinds of discoveries that you were involved with and that were so influential?
Well, it's very difficult really to monitor and to fund small science. So I think maybe small science is shortchanged and should be funded by people who should be done by people who have been successful so far. But I welcome the women and the brown and black people who have recently entered science. I think this is a tremendous change and an important variation and something to which we owe a lot in the conduct of society and democracy. So I think this is what Vannevar Bush was looking for in the Science, the Endless Frontier, his famous paper of 1945. So thank you for your question.
Thank you very much. I've been told to use technology, so let me first take a look at whose hand is raised. Deborah, you go next. And then Merlin.
I want to offer my congratulations to all of you. What a very interesting set of stories and the ways that you brought us into your trajectories. Thank you. This question's for you, Dr. King. This morning, several times, we've found ourselves up against the precipice of the really issue about about teaching, and in particular about what you work on, which is Black girls. And we know that Black girls are pushed out much more than any other group in the schools through harsh and unfair and disproportionate discipline that affects them for subjective judgments by teachers. And you tell a story about how exceptional people reached out and kept pulling you in. But you are working in so many different spaces to try to attack well, I don't know if attack's the right word, but to try to intervene on this problem, both in communities and churches, inside of schools, diversifying the teacher workforce. Do you have advice for us about how we could stop working in such piecemeal ways in this country and actually increase how Black girls are attracted to and included in and can show their brilliance in science education? I know this is what you work on. What advice do you have for us?
Ooh, Dr. Ball. So I think the biggest thing is that we have to stop operating in silos. Everyone is doing good work, but if we do not come together to do this work, it's not going to really take us to the next level. That we need to be able to really look at the child and the different constituents who are connected to the child. I thought it was very important because I kept reading, well, we offer this program, or NSF funded us to do this program, but the children who we initially said that we would be able to serve were not the ones coming. They wouldn't come. And so I said, well, we have to go to them. Like if they're not coming to you and they're not coming to your college campuses or your institutions, then we have to get out of the ivory tower or out of our institutions and actually go in the communities, go where they are, meet the families, meet those who are actually doing the work, wraparound programs with them, boys and girls clubs, develop relationships with them. And then once you establish that, then it's much easier to get them to then come to you. But it's built on relationships, it's built on trust. And we have to also understand that we may be an expert in some things. You know, I may be an expert in science education. You may be an expert in heat transfer. You may be an expert within ecology. But who are the experts with the people? Who are the ones who know who these children are? They've had relationships with their parents, their grandparents, their there's a familial capital, other forms of capital. We talk about Tarioso's community cultural wealth, and she discusses the various forms of capital that we need to begin to leverage. What is the navigational capital? What is the familial capital? What is the social capital? How are we beginning to now invest in humans, invest in people? And so that's what I hope to do, is to really build capacity to do this work. It's not easy. Initially, when I came into the academy, I was trying to figure out how was I going to be able to really conform to what the expectations were, especially on the tenure track. And the first couple of years, it was like, okay, you might be doing a little bit too much service and going in the communities and meeting people. And I said, well, sometimes you have to go slow in order to go fast. And so I'm thinking that we need to be able to develop that, go slow. Don't figure out, you're in the community one day and now all of a sudden you have the answer and you're running with, full speed ahead without the community, without the people that you were intended to serve. And so research practice partnerships, figuring out how we can, on equal level playing fields, not a hierarchical relationship, but as researchers and as practitioners, how can we now begin to come together around problems of practice that we can have more comprehensive view of what's happening and that we can be a little bit more impactful in the solutions that we're providing? That's going to be one of my recommendations. And as we begin to move forward, it's not just investing in like our students and our graduate students, but creating those programs where now the work that we've done within 6 through 12, now we can begin to help them to get into college. And when they're in college, we can provide that mentoring and support. And then when they go into careers and they can turn back and they become peer mentors or near peer mentors, so we now really build some true capacity to do this work. And that's what I'm hoping that we can do, is have that forward momentum, but then also where the Academy sees that community engaged scholarship is truly scholarship, and it is very, very important, and it's not just service. And when we start thinking in those lines, then it allows us to really move the needle, so to say, move the needle, which there's a lot of needles that need to be moved at this point. But if I can just operate it within my sphere of influence, you can operate within yours, but we're coming together. That's how we begin to have more momentum around these issues.
Thank you. We may have time for maybe 2 very quick questions. Merlin and then Maureen, if we still have time. I really don't like cutting it off, but we still have lunch coming forward.
Okay, I'm going to be real quick. Thank you. You somewhat answered my question just recently, Dr. King. I came from a very similar household, Caribbean parents. And thank you, and I commend you for extending science education in community-based organizations. Because when I think of the most influential people on a child's life, it's their parents, their coaches, their church members. So I'm wondering, how involved are these people in the programs that you're developing? And do you have programs to involve those? Again, the parents really dictate to kids what they're going to do. They have the biggest influential decision on kids' life. And then I also wonder, what challenges have you faced in doing so? If you can just give an example of one and how you mitigate that.
Oh, the challenge, we might have to wait for lunch. But working alongside with parents and also with teachers, because teachers and counselors, those are the ones who recommend our children for advanced placement courses or the magnet programs, and they can essentially shift the trajectory of someone's life. And so if we can really work alongside with parents and with families within the community-based organizations, but also bring them on our campuses. For example, we'll have parents and children and the whole families on our campus on Saturday. We'll give them a tour. We'll introduce them to STEAM education. We will demystify what it means for you to say you want to become an engineer, or if you're interested in game. We're going to do a lot more around game development, game design. We have majors for this in our institutions. And so we're connecting those faculty now with doing some of this pipeline work. You asked about some of the challenges. I think initially when I started, the challenge was helping parents to understand how valuable this was and how important it was to get their children engaged, particularly during the summer months. I'm a founder of an executive director of I Am STEM camps, and our goal is really to transform the face of STEM one community at a time. And so doing this community engaged work, I started noticing that less and less of my time was spent telling parents, look, you need to get your kids involved. Less of my time was spent recruiting. And I started looking around, and parents were telling other parents, oh, you need to register, this child in this program. It works. My child is getting tested for gifted. They did this program during the summer. It wasn't anything spectacular. It was just that we had teachers who looked like the children. The curriculum was designed for them so that they could be successful. And then you had a group of people who truly believed in them, and we followed them through school. If they had issues, they knew to contact me. They could contact someone off the team. We would be able to help them navigate that. And so once they started building their own support networks, that's what helped them to be a little bit more successful. I don't spend a lot of time now doing that work. Parents are now doing that work. We opened up our registration, and within the first week, we had over 150 parents that already registered their kids. These are Black and brown children. Most of them are African-American, 90% are African-American parents. So if we can begin to help them to understand what is going on, why does it matter? And then their children, they see the impact that it has on their children, then they can now be equipped to help other families. And now that we're not the ones that's experts, doing the work, but the parents are now carrying a lot of that load, and the students are now being able to pursue different trajectories.
Well, thank you so much. Wanda, last question goes to you.
Comment. I too congratulate each and every one of you on your extraordinary accomplishments. I would like to offer one resource that may be particularly of interest to Dr. King, and that is just last week, PCAST, the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology, just a week ago issued a report called Supporting the U.S. Public Health Workforce. I mentioned it to Julia during the break. I think you'll find it and others will find it extraordinarily informative and interesting. One of the three main recommendations that they made was to advance health equity through strengthening public health capacity for community engagement. And to some of the points that you've been speaking about, Dr. King, it recommends the development and sustaining a robust public health workforce that is deeply rooted in and trusted by their communities. It talks about community health workers and the need to expand a national community of practice that's focused on scientifically informed, community engaged practices for health equity that includes public health agencies. And primarily it argues that America's health and economic stability depend upon a robust public health system. I would recommend that to you and to others in the room.
Thank you so much. With that, I have to close the floor for conversation, but congratulations to you again. And the rest of the board is really looking forward to talking with you some more during the lunch and also celebrate with you tonight at the NSF's Awards Gala. I also want to mention that both NSF and NSB have created videos celebrating the career achievements of our awardees, and those videos will actually debut tonight, and after that they will be put online on our websites. So with that, stay tuned and enjoy your lunch. Thank you.